Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. This is Mental Muse 2.0, and I just want to sit here and talk to you guys and wondering if how many of you guys remember Muppet Babies, remember Sesame Street, and even watched The Labyrinth, and as well as The Dark Crystal, and things like that. So I grew up with nothing but the wonderful of Jim Henson and all his creations. Now, I thought I would sit here. I'm just wondering how many of you guys are in my age bracket, at least are on my channel, and or listen to or watch my YouTube channel. And I've remembered a bunch of these things, and they're still ongoing now that the Disney Corporation owns pretty much all his work. But I wanted to talk to you guys. I want to do a deep dive into who exactly Jim Henson is and his family and upbringing and stuff like that before the things that we knew about. I want to go back to the very beginning of this man's mind. He is a fantastic creator, and I want to know, where did this all begin and how did he become the most well-known man out there, and yet most people don't even know who he is and why he created all the creatures and of all his imagination in his brain that could all up into one big old ball. How did he do this, and where did it come from? So I want to do a deep dive into it. So I'm going to go on here, and instead of me writing out a whole script and stuff like that, I'm going to go on here and I'm going online and I'm going to research and I'm going to read things that I find upon about Jim Henson and just bottle it all up in one video for you guys. And let's just hope that you guys would, follow along and, let's go down memory lane. I mean, some of these things, some things I've already come across and I'm like, I didn't even know this show existed, and he did it. There's some things I didn't even know about, some characters I didn't know about that he did. But I also want to go into and then I'm probably going to spin off either in this video, or I may do a separate video for it depending on how long this one is. And this one may be lengthy, who knows. But I want to do an evolution of all the Sesame Street, mainly just Sesame Street only, of all the monsters, of their family. I want to know the evolution of it. I want to know who was the first monster and what was what is it supposed to represent, but at the same time I also want to know who came next and how did we get to where Sesame Street is today. I may do a separate spin-off video of that, because that in itself is going to be kind of lengthy as well, considering how long it's been on. But because we're talking about Jim Henson, we're going to be talking a little bit about Sesame Street and those characters. So like I said, I'm not going to go too deep into it, because this video is specifically about him and his creation and so forth. But it's hard to talk about Jim Henson and not talk about Sesame Street and the Muppets and things like that. So, but I will do a separate video, probably follow it up with this one, and we'll talk specifically about the actual puppets themselves, and we'll go from there. So sit back, relax, grab yourself some drink, something, a snack on, maybe a whole meal, because this video may be lengthy. And while you're here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and hope you guys are sharing my videos. And yeah, let's get ahead and get into it. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so before I get started talking about Jim Henson, the puppet, Sesame Street, and all Muppet creator, I want to mention real quick, there is another Jim Henson, and I believe this needs to be said, because I believe there's not enough information on this gentleman, and I think it needs to be heard, because unfortunately, it's not being taught too much. My daughter, who is her senior year of high school now, she said I think she learned about this man. I think a couple years ago or whatever, but I didn't know she was aware because I wasn't aware, but that she learned about him. But I want to give him credit and on this because not because they share the same name, but they do have a similarities. Because this gentleman was born in Maryland. Jim Henson went to the University of Maryland, and I think it's kind of interesting. And there is on Wikipedia, of course, we got to go to there. We have to start there, right? Because Wikipedia, even though it is not a suitable, credible source, we still have to include it. So I want to just read what Wikipedia has on this Jim Henson. He's a memorialist, okay? He was an African American man who was enslaved in Maryland. He escaped slavery and made his way to Canada, okay, where his slave narrative entitled Broken Shackles. Check that out if you can find it. It was published in 1889, guys. 1889. That's a pretty long time, right? Ago. And actually a picture of him, I'm going to post it on here. If you were on my podcast or whatever it is, I mean, this gentleman looks like, if you ever seen the show Sanford and Son, he looks very much like the father, and I just want to smile when I see his picture because he looks like he's trying to smile. And even though back then a lot of people did not smile in photographs, especially if you were enslaved, it wasn't a happy time. You were happy to have a job and still be alive, and you were blessed in that concept. But it was not happy, and it was not meant for you to be happy, unfortunately. But you deserve to be happy, and we all do in this world, regardless of color of skin. And I want to let that be known. He was a farmer. His nationality is Canadian. But even though he was enslaved in Maryland, but he settled on Owen Sound on Gregorian Bay. His maternal grandmother, Chandessa, or it could be Candessa. It's a CH. I want to assume it's probably more pronounced with a K, like Candessa. Was the daughter of a chieftain of the Bagarimi people. I'm so sorry if I am not pronouncing these correctly, but it is now Chad when she was kidnapped. In his review, future poet laureate of Canada, George Eliot Clark, cheered the 2002 Republican of Henson's memoirs, characterizing it as one of the humble wellsprings of what we now proudly term African Canadian literature. So anyway, he traveled through Pennsylvania and New York State, and then he made his way to Canada. That's how he escaped slavery, because in Canada, slavery for African Americans wasn't a thing, I guess, or he was seeking refuge, and we apparently still had it here. So Henson had 7 different masters while he was a slave. His first master's widow had promised to free all of her slaves when they reached the age of 35, but she died before he reached 35. How sad is that, right? It's like you looked forward to it and you're like, man, okay, I know I'm going to be free when I reach 35, because he probably saw this. He saw people when they did reach 35 and she did free them. So she, when they reached 35 and, and they got freed, so he saw it really happen. He's always thinking, okay, so when I hit 35, I'm going to get free too. But she died before he reached 35, unfortunately. So at the time he escaped, he needed only to make his way to Pennsylvania in order to be free. Because I think at that time I have not done my research on this particular one, because I was not going to talk about him particular. I was going to talk about Jim Henson and the Muppets on Sesame Street, but then I came across this and I thought I need to read this to you guys, because he needs some kind of, I guess, some kind of recognition needs to be acknowledged, because I think it seems to only be fair. Not because they share the same name, but everybody wants to talk about Jim Henson, and everybody, when you Google Jim Henson, all you can find is the puppeteer, the Muppeteer, you know what I mean? Disney, things like that. But you don't know about Jim Henson, the memorialist. And I may do a separate video on just him alone if I can find more and more research about him. But feel free, guys. You can do it yourselves as well. It's not just information for me. You guys can do it yourselves too as well. But I think I may make a separate video about him, because it sounds interesting, and I may actually check out his memoir called Broken Shackles, because I'm curious about it. I think that's got to be quite a journey to go from, Maryland to make it to Pennsylvania just to be free. He lived there for several years, and then he decided to make his home in Canada after the passage of a law that allowed bounty hunters to seize any African Americans inside the United States, which they suspected were fugitive slaves. So he found out, oh my gosh, I thought I was going to be free because I got to Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, we don't have slaves in Pennsylvania. I just have to make it there, and then I'm free. I'm good. But then apparently there was a law in the United States that allowed bounty hunters. I suspect they're probably Caucasian bounty hunters. Probably a lot of them. Given the time period, and they're probably, because bounty hunters make money off of this. I'm not saying, if you've never seen Dog the Bounty Hunter, you saw how he does his things. I believe that it's pretty much the same. You make money off of it. You find fugitives who are on the run. You find them. You pretty much arrest them, and you bring them in and say, here's your prize. I want my money. And that's what it is. Unfortunately, these slaves did not deserve. First of all, slavery shouldn't have existed. Second of all, even though it did exist, and they were trying to be free, they had a right to be free. They had a right to run, and even though when they did escape the state that was enslaving them, to go to another state that does not have slaves, they should be free. They can rest now. They can breathe. They realize I am equal, at least equal enough to know that you are safe, and you don't have to worry about somebody ordering you around working in fields and things like that. And if you did work in a field in a state that didn't enslave slaves, you were working and you were getting paid. Or at least you got free room and board. You were treated as a worker, not as a slave. There's a difference. And so it's sad to hear that here in the United States that they passed a law that allowed these bounty hunters to go in any state, even if there's no slaves in there, to find anyone who they thought was a slave. So, aka basically anyone who's African American, because back then that's how it was. Any African American, basically in any state, could be suspected as a fugitive slave, one who ran from their state, and he was one of them. He ran from Maryland to Pennsylvania, and so he can be free, because his original master did not didn't free him, because she had died before reaching 35, or before he reached 35. So he thought, well, I don't now. I mean, if my master remarries another woman, I mean, she probably won't make the same promise, and she's just going to keep me around. Back then, this tells you the man didn't really run the household. It was the woman, because the woman stayed at home all the time. The man also had a job. These men who owned these slaves were lawyers. They were, congressmen. They were also people, maybe in positions, doctors. They were prominent people, and they did not, and they even ran a farm. They may have been on their horses and walking around and making sure the slaves were doing their job, but the woman was the one who mainly made the choice of, okay, I want more help around the house. I want more help in the fields. They're not moving fast enough. I need this and that, and the man, of course, is going to appease the woman, and because the woman, the woman maintained her beauty. As long as she stayed young and looked beautiful, the man, basically, this is where trophy wife comes into play. So as long as she becomes this, she looks beautiful, and she only looks beautiful when she's happy, and she'll stay young longer, because they believe if you're happy, you won't have wrinkles, you won't have gray hair. They believed that apparently back then. So as long as the woman was happy in her marriage and so forth, then everything was good and golden, right? So apparently, it does not surprise me that hearing that his first master, who actually really did own the slaves, she didn't own the slaves, but she was the one who dictated. It's kind of like when we all know president, right? Okay, the president of the United States. We all know the woman, the wife, is who's really making these rules, and the man is the face. Well, basically, that's what it was back then. It's like the master's widow promised, to to free our slaves. Now it says it's widow, which means that means her husband was dead and gone, and so, or maybe I'm reading that wrong. Yeah, I think I got that backwards. Sorry. So I believe that that's what happened was that. So yeah, he had, his master's widow promised to free all her slaves when they reached the age of 35, but she died before he reached 35. So anyway, unfortunately, these bounty hunters were able to, after he lived in Pennsylvania, and he's been in Pennsylvania, so he's been free for several years. Okay. And after living there for several years, he found out that, hey, they passed the law and we're going around. And so he's like, oh, I got to get out of here. I mean, it doesn't matter what state I move to. Now they pass this law in the United States that they can seize anybody they suspect as a slave, even if I wasn't a slave. But odds are, if you were African American back then, you were a slave. I don't know many I haven't heard of many, African Americans who were not slaves back in 1800s. So, yeah, it's very rare. I'm not saying that all African Americans were slaves, but I'm saying that is a good chunk of them were. I'm going to say probably, let's say if you have 100 line up, I'm going to say probably at a good 90. I would say 90, 91 of them are probably, maybe even close to 95 of them were slaves. And then the rest were probably either the only reason they got prominent because they came from overseas with money and they bought their freedom before they even became a slave, and they were able to maintain that, and they had the right, they knew the right people, and they knew the right ways of, of working their way into the system where they didn't have to work, and they had that protection of money because they had money. It was protecting them. So, and then they use that money to pay the right people, Caucasian people, and so those Caucasian people were left them alone. And I'm not going to say for sure, but I honestly do believe there's probably information out there that will back this up, that there were African Americans who owned other African American slaves. It wasn't just Caucasian people. It wasn't just the Anglo-Saxon, European individuals who owned African American slaves. I believe there were some African Americans themselves who also owned African American slaves and treated them the same way as a Caucasian person would. And I think, I'm not saying that's any better, but to me, I feel like that's so hard. I think that would be so hard to face if someone of the same nationality as me is riding on a horse next to me and basically cracking a whip at me because I decide to sit down and rest for a minute, in this hot field, picking cotton or picking, tea leaves or whatever it is, and or picking berries, and it's so hot, and I'm sitting here resting, and the same person who looks just like me is up on a horse and cracking a whip at me and hitting me because I took 5 minutes to breathe or take a drink of a sip of some water. To me, I think that's almost 10 times worse than someone of a different color of skin as me that did the same thing. Because it's almost like, and this is why I am fine with, this is why we have this mentality of now we have African Americans out there, especially male ones, who are saying, we have to watch out for each other. We're brothers, but yet you're not brothers if you have a Caucasian friend. You can't say, hey, we're brothers, you don't do that because it's in the genes. It's hardwired in their brains. It's passed on through generations that you have to stick together. And this is where we have to break that bond. We have to break that mindset because you have to see beyond that color of skin. But it's so hard to, because if you are of that same, you saw yourself as equals because if we're both black and you're on that horse and you're beating me and telling me to bow down and kiss your feet and work on this hot sun, you're saying you're better than me. But yet I don't understand that because you're African American and I'm African American. So why, how does it make you better than me? And it's hard to get out of that mindset. And I think it's like, And it's weird because when it comes to Caucasians, and I myself is Caucasian, as y'all know, I feel like it's hard to get out of that. It's weird. It's hard for us to see this. We don't see things like that. If I saw another Caucasian person who is living the life and everything like that, and then they talk down on me and call me white trash or redneck or something like that, and I guess I don't see, I'm thinking, what makes me that way? Is it because I don't live in a nice fancy house? I don't drive a fancy car, and all those things. I don't live that lifestyle like you do, but yet you're white. You know what I'm saying? And it's a little different for us. And I think most Caucasians understand where I'm coming from. It is. It's really strange, and I wonder why that is. I wonder why. Because there were Caucasian slaves back then as well. It wasn't widely talked about. I think every race at one point in time were a slave. I mean, no matter what nationality you were, I think we all owned either a slave or was a slave or both at one given time. I think when I say we, I mean like collectively as society, as humans. It doesn't matter in what generation, what century you lived in. I believe it was all generally the same. So I'm hoping I'm making sense here, and I'm hoping I'm not stepping on anybody's toes, and I hope that nobody is taking anything. If I'm saying things wrong, please correct me, but please do it diligently and back it up with receipts or something, because you don't attack me for it. I'm just trying to understand it all. But at the same time, I want to move forward. I'm going to finish reading about Jim Henson, the memorialist, real quick, and then we will get into talking about who I really originally was going to talk about was Jim Henson and his life as well, the puppeteer, and so forth. So the Jim Henson, the memorialist, though, after he found out about the whole bounty hunters were coming after him, and he realized no matter what state he go into, just because he was African American, whether they knew he was a slave or not, he was afraid that, oh my gosh, they're going to come after me. They're going to assume that I'm a slave because I am African American. So he found a way somehow. He made his way from Pennsylvania towards Canada, and he left the U.S. So now the bounty hunters cannot get him because, bounty hunters are only here in America, and our laws are not the same as Canada's laws. It's like two different, places. So, basically countries. So in 1989, though, when John Frost wrote Henson's memoirs based on his oral account of his life, because Jim Henson probably didn't know how to read. He probably didn't know how to write. He probably didn't know the alphabet. He didn't have the education. So, and it's not his fault. And that's just how it was back then. I mean, you get caught with the book, even if you did learn to read or you learned to write and stuff like that. They wanted to keep him down. They want to keep you uneducated. Because once you learn to read and once you learn to write, you are free. And I believe that they didn't want them to be free. Because the laws could have changed, and as long as they don't read and write and they don't get access to, radios, television, whatever it may be, they don't have access to mail or anything like that, you can continue to own them. And if someone says, well, why do you still have slaves? They can be free. Why, you're wrong for that. Well, they can say, well, mind your business. You know what I mean? And they want to work here. They got free room and board. They got food. They're workers. That's how they get paid. They get to live on the land. They get to live here. And maybe that's not true. Maybe because they don't really want to be there. They didn't want to be there. But because they couldn't read and write, and they wouldn't have access to newspapers and telegrams or anything like that, they didn't have access. Only access they have is through word of mouth. And if they didn't, and even though word of mouth, you have to trust what that person is telling you is true. And it's hard to believe if someone came to you and said, hey, by the way, you know what? Slavery has been abolished. You know, are you going to believe it after centuries of your family and friends have been through this, and you've been doing this for years and years and years? Are you really you've been doing this since you were born? I mean, are you going to believe that just because one person told you this? Especially a person that is not, who is not a slave or was never a slave themselves. Are you going to believe that? Or you think it's a trick? Or you think it's a trick that because you're going to think, okay, so I'm not a slave no more, so now I can leave. But as soon as you step and walk off that property, you get shot because you believed it. Because what if it was a trick? So what do? You're scared, so you continue to work. You're not going to believe them. You're not going to believe if someone told you that. So I mean, it's unfortunate that's how it worked. And it was a risk until you can get a hold of somebody or something, and at least one person in your little community secretly learned how to read or write, or got hold of the newspaper, or got a hold of, or was able to listen to a radio or a television or something, and was able to told that, hey, we're really free. Look, I have proof, or, was able to, they were a trusted community. Until that happened, you continued on, regardless, even though the law has changed. And you would never have known, especially in certain communities, because homes were miles apart from each other. Like, you didn't just yell at your neighbor across the yard, like, hey, how you doing? No, you didn't do that back then. If you owned a slave, you owned acres of land, you have a home, and your nearest neighbor was miles apart. You couldn't, if you were going to walk through their home, which you never did, because, you don't do that, because you're going to mess up your shoes, you're going to mess up your nice, pretty dresses and your pants, and it's too hot, and you're going to be sweaty, so you got in your nice little horse and buggy, and you rode to the neighbor's home. I mean, that's how it worked. But fortunately, Jim Henson, he made his way to Canada, and I'm proud to say that John Frost wrote Henson's memoirs based on whenever Henson told him about his life and everything. John Frost wrote the book. The book's publication led to Henson reuniting with his long-lost wife, which is this is why I want to read the book. I think this is going to be a beautiful book. Henson was able to join her in Philadelphia, and they were able to spend their final months of life together. They were only together for a couple months. And then I guess, I'm assuming he passed away then. But like again, this is the Wikipedia. I haven't done any more, actual research or anything like that on that. But I would love to I think I'm going to try to find, the memoir Broken Shackles, by I guess John Frost, but AKA it's Henson's memoir. I'm gonna try to. If you do get it and you read it, please note language is going to be different in it because it's 1989 when it was written. 1889. So it's well over 100 years old. So the language may be a little bit harder, or it may be terms used in it may not be appropriate for what we believe. So again, but the great thing about it is I'm glad he's been recognized in 2002. He was cheered on. And he was acknowledged even after death, and as one of the humble springs of what we now call and now proudly term African Canadian literature. So, congratulations. His occupation was considered a farmer. His nationality is Canadian. He was born in Maryland, but he became a Canadian national whenever he sought refuge there. Back then, all you had to do was say, hey, I'm going to live here from now on, and that's it. You know what I mean? They were good. So, yeah. And he escaped slavery and dictated a whole memoir called Broken Shackles. So check it out. It's by John Frost. And if you want to read more about him, comment down below if you guys want me to, comment down below. Type in the word memorialist or Jim Henson, slave, escapee or something like that, or something along those lines, so I know which one you're talking about. And let me know down below if you want me to do a video specifically on him a little bit more. But if I do one, I will do it after I read the book Broken Shackles and so forth, his memoir, so I can do better notes about it and have more depthness of it. But I wanted to go ahead and spend time talking about him before I got into Jim Henson, the well-known one that everybody already knows about. So I wanted to give him a little bit of props beforehand. So, because I believe it's due. It's due for him to be, acknowledged, especially on social media and on YouTube and so forth. So, all right. So now let's move forward. Let's go ahead and get into Jim Henson, the puppeteer, and let's see what brought his whole imagination, and let's get into his world for a little while. Okay. So, now's the time, real quick, before we get into it, real quick, guys, go ahead and hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit that share button, and comment down below again if you would like for me to do more research on Jim Henson, the escaped slavery and dictated his memoir. He was enslaved in Maryland, so yeah, and he escaped and all that stuff. Let me know down below. And so that gives me time to do my own research, and I will make a video about him. So, but I have included a photo of him, so you guys will go ahead and, you can see. This is the only photo I seen of him on what do you call it? On Wikipedia. That's the only one they have, unfortunately. I'm pretty sure there's probably a little bit more out there on the web, but this is what he looks like. And again, if you're just listening, which is fine, he looks, to me, he reminds me of, he almost kind of reminds me of Fred on Sanford and Sons. I think his name was Fred. Is it Fred? Or Red? I can't remember. But anyways, I think Red may be his real name, or Fred may be his real name. I can't remember. But, yeah, on the show, Sanford and Sons, so I think it's Fred Sanford. That makes sense. So, but I think his the guy who plays that character, I think his real name is Red, I think. So I love that show. I think it's hilarious. I think it's a great father-son thing. But yeah, so that's who he reminds me of, and I can't help but smile at him. But I'm hoping he's happy in that photo. He looks like he's kind of grinning. But yeah. And again, back then, it wasn't a whole lot of pictures taken of slaves, except if it was from a point of view to make it seem like, look what I can do, I'm making them work. And I think that's just horrible. But to see in a light of a picture of him standing there, and he looks like he's probably, and I'm trying to think about what is he looking at. I think he's looking at, I want to say it's almost like it's a picture of him. It says it's a picture of him in 88, and I don't think that's before he met his wife, because he didn't, but I want to say maybe it was a picture of him when he got to Canada, and he probably felt like I'm free, I'm good, and it looks like just you can see the worn face, but it does also, you can also tell, you can see through the energy through the photo of the I am of the energy that he's putting out, that he's like, I made it. It's like you can almost hear him say it, I made it. And so yeah, and you know what, Mr. Henson, yes, you did. You made it. You made it to Canada. You made it safely, and I'm glad you finally reunited with your long lost wife, and you were able to at least spend his final months together with her, and and you were able to come back to the United States in Philadelphia to see her, and yeah, so that's a good thing. Yeah. So, all right. So yeah, we talked a lot about Jim Henson, the memorialist, and I told you this video was going to be mainly about Jim Henson, the puppeteer, and who did the Muppets and all that. And I believe this is going to be, since I talked so much about the one who really deserved the attention, Jim Henson, and his memoir and all that stuff, the one who was enslaved and who lived in Canada and so forth. I talked too much about that. So, it's really not been talked enough, but I think this video has been long enough. I didn't realize I went on over 40 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and make this a two-part series. I apologize if you guys were looking forward to the Jim Henson thing in this video, but this video, I think I'm just going to dedicate this video to Jim Henson, the man who was enslaved and had 7 masters, and escaped and went to Canada. And I mean, how much more can you say? I mean, there's probably a lot more to say, but I think I'm going to leave it at this. And this will be part 1 of the Hensons. I think I'm going to title this The Two Hensons, because I think one is not talked enough about and the other one is talked too much about. So, but I still want to talk about Jim Henson, the puppeteer. So, with that being said, guys, I do appreciate your patience. I appreciate your kindness and understanding, and I'm hoping to put out the one about the puppeteer pretty soon, probably here in the next couple days. Just give me a couple days, and then I will put one out there for you guys, and I will be titling that part 2, and yeah, so this is going to be a sequel. So I hope you guys enjoy it, and I hope you guys learn something. And yeah, check out Broken Shackles. I'm going to try to see if I can find it as well, and read it and get a little deeper into it. And I may make another part or add to this one. I don't know yet. And then yeah, and then we'll go or make a whole separate playlist just dedicated to him. So I think it's kind of an interesting that I'm kind of curious on. Hopefully it talks more about all his masters and, his story, because it seems pretty interesting to have 7 masters, and, you traveled and you escaped, and yeah, you went off to Canada, and then you got reunited with your wife after writing your memoir. And I mean, I'm interested in that story. So I don't know about you guys, but I am, and I believe it deserves to be told. I mean, everybody knows about I'm not trying to step on any toes here. Everybody knows about the white Jim Henson, but nobody knows about the African American Jim Henson, whose story is probably a lot more prominent, a lot more important than somebody who did puppets. So, but either way, I'm still interested, and I still want to get this out there because I want to reconnect with my childhood. So I'm going to talk about both, but there will be a part 2. The part 2 will be Jim Henson, the one who did the Muppets, the Sesame Street and all that stuff too. So yeah, this is going to be probably a playlist within itself. I probably will make a playlist within itself because there's a lot to be said here, and I don't want to go too far into it, and I'm trying not to make all my videos too long for you guys, but I Get Your Fashion, you know me already by now. Mental Muse always makes videos that are they're hardly ever shorter than 10 minutes. So yeah, I guess that's it. I hope you guys have a great day. Thanks for listening, and I hope you learned something, and I hope you're kind to one another, and I hope you guys, like I said, let me know down below if you'd like to know more. And either way, I probably still will post it because I know you guys probably never will comment, but that's okay. That's your choice. But as long as you stay subscribed, and please share my videos, and please hit that like button, and show Jim Henson some love by hitting that like button because he deserves it. So I guess that's it. So I hope you guys aren't too disappointed that I'm ending this video. I know at the beginning I said that I was going to talk about but I was going to talk about Jim Henson, the puppeteer, but I started talking, and then I looked up, and then I found Jim Henson, and I thought, I'll get 10 minutes into this, and let's just talk about this person, and then it turned into being a whole 45-minute video. So but you know what? I really don't care because I believe he deserves a lot more than that, considering all the work he's done and the wrong enslavement that had happened here in the United States, and it's unfortunate. So, but that's history for you. So anyways, guys, have a great day, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!